Sarah Martinez never imagined she would be crouched behind a crumbling concrete wall in Afghanistan, dirt and debris raining down on her helmet as explosions echoed through the valley. Just 6 months ago, she had been working night shifts at Denver General Hospital, treating everything from car accident victims to heart attack patients. Now, at 26 years old, she was a Navy corpsman attached to SEAL Team 6, and this was her first real combat deployment. The morning had started like any other patrol in the Kunar province. Intelligence reports suggested a small Taliban cell was operating from a compound nestled in the mountains, approximately 15 kilometers from their forward operating base. What should have been a routine reconnaissance mission quickly turned into something far more dangerous when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device just 2 clicks from the target location. Sarah remembered the deafening blast that lifted their Humvee clean off the ground. She had been thrown against the vehicle's armored wall, her medical kit scattering across the floor. When the ringing in her ears finally subsided, she heard the unmistakable sound of AK-47 fire peppering their position. The ambush was well coordinated, with enemy fighters positioned on multiple ridgelines surrounding their disabled convoy. "Doc! We got wounded over here." The voice belonged to Petty Officer Rodriguez, one of the newer SEALs she had been working with during training exercises. Sarah grabbed her aid bag and low-crawled toward his position, keeping her head down as bullets whined overhead. She found Rodriguez applying pressure to a deep gash on another SEAL's leg, blood seeping through his tactical gloves. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, immediately taking over the treatment. She had learned during her medical training that staying calm under pressure was essential, but nothing had prepared her for the chaos of actual combat. The wounded SEAL, Petty Officer Johnson, was conscious but pale. His femoral artery had been nicked by shrapnel, and he was losing blood fast. "I can handle this," Sarah told Rodriguez, her hands working automatically as she applied a tourniquet and prepped in 4-line. "Get back to your position and keep those guys busy." The sound of gunfire intensified around them as she worked. Enemy muzzle flashes lit up the mountainside like deadly fireflies, and she could hear the distinctive crack of sniper rounds passing uncomfortably close to their position. Commander Jake Morrison watched his corpsman work from his covered position 30 meters away. At 34, Morrison was a veteran of countless operations across Iraq and Afghanistan. He had seen many combat medics in action, but there was something different about Martinez. While other medical personnel often froze during their first firefight, she moved with purpose and confidence that impressed even his most seasoned operators. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What they had initially estimated as a small enemy force was proving to be much larger and better equipped than intelligence had suggested. Morrison counted muzzle flashes from at least 12 different positions, and the enemy had obvious high ground advantage. His team was pinned down in a dried riverbed with minimal cover, and their radio operator had been trying unsuccessfully to raise their quick reaction force for the past 20 minutes. "We need to move to better cover," Morrison called out to his team leaders. "There's a small building about 200 meters east. We'll bound by fire teams." But, as he was coordinating the movement, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Several enemy fighters were moving to flank their position from the north, using a narrow canyon that would put them directly behind the SEAL team's defensive line. Morrison made a quick decision. He would need to establish an overwatch position to protect his team's movement, but his designated marksman had been in the Humvee that hit the IED and was currently unconscious with a concussion. The commander looked at his Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle, then at the rocky outcropping that would give him the perfect vantage point to cover his team's withdrawal. Sarah had just finished stabilizing Johnson when she heard Commander Morrison calling for covering fire. She looked up to see him sprinting toward a pile of boulders, his heavy rifle in hand. But, halfway to his position, she saw him stumble and fall hard. Enemy fire had found its mark, and Morrison was down behind a small mound of earth, his right shoulder clearly wounded. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her aid bag and started moving toward the commander's position. "Martinez, stay where you are," Morrison shouted, but Sarah was already committed to the movement. She had taken an oath to provide medical care regardless of the circumstances, and she wasn't about to let the team leader bleed out while she stayed safely behind cover. The 30-meter sprint felt like it took forever. Bullets kicked up dirt around her boots as she ran in a zigzag pattern, just like they had taught her during combat training. She dove the last few meters, landing hard next to Morrison's position. The commander was conscious but, grimacing in pain, blood seeping through his tactical vest where a round had found a gap in his body armor. "How bad is it, sir?" Sarah asked, already cutting away fabric to assess the wound. The bullet had passed through his right shoulder, missing the major arteries but damaging muscle and, possibly nicking bone. It was painful and would limit his mobility, but it wasn't immediately life-threatening if properly treated. "I'll live, Doc, but we got bigger problems," Morrison replied, nodding toward the Barrett rifle lying a few feet away. "I need to get to that overwatch position, but I can't operate the rifle with this shoulder. My team is about to get flanked, and if I don't take out those guys moving through the canyon, we're all dead." Sarah looked at the massive rifle, then at the rocky position Morrison had been trying to reach. She had fired various weapons during her military training, including the M4 carbine and M249 light machine gun, but the Barrett .50 caliber was in a completely different category. It was a precision instrument designed for long-range engagement, weighing nearly 30 pounds and capable of stopping vehicles or penetrating light armor at distances exceeding a mile. "Sir, I've never fired a Barrett before," Sarah admitted, applying a field dressing to Morrison's wound. "I can patch you up and get you mobile enough to make the shot yourself." Morrison shook his head. "There's no time, and even if you fix me up, I won't be accurate enough with this shoulder. You're going to have to take the shot." He looked directly into her eyes, and she could see the gravity of the situation reflected in his expression. "Martinez, I've watched you under pressure. You don't panic, and you have steady hands. Those are the two most important qualities for a marksman." The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and Sarah could hear Morrison's team calling for covering fire over the radio. She looked at the Barrett again, its massive scope and bipod making it look more like a piece of artillery than a rifle. But she also understood that sometimes circumstances required people to step outside their designated roles. She had become a medic to save lives, and right now, the best way to save lives might be to take one. "Talk me through it, sir," Sarah said, her decision made. She dragged the heavy rifle toward their position while Morrison provided rapid instruction. "The scope is already zeroed for 800 meters. You see those rocks where the muzzle flashes are coming from? That's about 850 meters, so you'll need to hold just slightly high." Morrison's team was beginning their bound movement toward better cover, but enemy fighters were closing in from the flanking position. Sarah could see 3 figures moving through the canyon, carrying what looked like an RPG launcher. If they reached their intended position, they would have a clear shot at the withdrawing SEALs. Sarah positioned herself behind the massive rifle, adjusting the bipod legs for stability. The weapon felt foreign in her hands, much heavier and more unwieldy than anything she had trained with. Through the powerful scope, she could clearly see the enemy fighters moving through the canyon. They were moving quickly but predictably, following a well-worn path that suggested they had used this flanking route before. "Remember, the Barrett has significant recoil," Morrison instructed, his voice tight with pain. "Keep your body positioned properly, and don't fight the rifle when it fires. Let it do what it's designed to do." Sarah nodded, trying to control her breathing as she had been taught during basic marksmanship training. She could hear Morrison coordinating with his team over the radio, giving them updates on the flanking movement and preparing them for the covering fire she was about to provide. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. These weren't just targets on a training range, they were real people, and her actions would determine whether her teammates lived or died. Sarah placed the crosshairs on the lead enemy fighter, a man carrying what she now confirmed was an RPG-7 launcher. He was approximately 850 meters away, moving at a steady pace through the rocky terrain. She adjusted her aim point slightly high to compensate for the distance, just as Morrison had instructed. Her finger found the trigger, and she began applying steady pressure while controlling her breathing. The Barrett .50 caliber fired with a tremendous roar that echoed through the valley. The massive recoil drove the rifle back against Sarah's shoulder with incredible force, far beyond anything she had experienced with smaller weapons. Through the scope, she watched as the enemy fighter dropped instantly, the massive .50 caliber round having found its target. Outstanding shot, Doc," Morrison called out, but there was no time for celebration. The second enemy fighter had taken cover behind a boulder and was setting up what appeared to be a mortar tube. Sarah worked the bolt action, chambering another round while fighting against the adrenaline that was making her hands shake. The second shot was more difficult. The target was partially concealed, and she could only see portions of his body as he moved behind cover. Sarah had to wait for the right moment, timing her shot for when the fighter exposed himself to adjust his mortar position. When the opportunity came, she was ready. The second round struck the boulder just inches from the target, sending rock fragments flying but not achieving a direct hit. However, the psychological effect was immediate. The enemy fighter abandoned his position and began retreating deeper into the canyon, apparently deciding that facing a Barrett .50 caliber was not worth continuing the attack. Morrison's team had successfully reached better cover during Sarah's engagement, and the enemy fire was beginning to slacken as the Taliban fighters realized they were facing more opposition than they had anticipated. The quick reaction force finally arrived 20 minutes later, providing the additional firepower needed to completely break contact with the enemy. As the immediate danger passed, Sarah found herself staring at the massive rifle in her hands. She had crossed a line that morning, transitioning from someone who saved lives to someone who had taken one. The weight of that realization was almost as heavy as the Barrett itself. Morrison, despite his wound, made his way over to her position. "Martinez, you saved my team today. That was exceptional shooting under pressure." Sarah nodded, but her mind was processing everything that had just happened. She had joined the military to be a healer, to patch up wounded warriors and send them home to their families. Now she had killed another human being, even though it was clearly in defense of her teammates. The helicopter evacuation arrived an hour later, and Sarah found herself treating Morrison's shoulder wound during the flight back to base. As she worked, she couldn't help but think about how dramatically her role had changed in the span of a single firefight. She was still the medic, still the person her team depended on when they were hurt. But now she was something else as well. Back at the forward operating base, word of the engagement spread quickly through the special operations community. Stories had a way of growing in the retelling, but the basic facts remained the same. The team's corpsman had picked up a Barrett .50 caliber rifle during a firefight and made 2 precision shots at long range, saving her team from being overrun. That evening, as Sarah cleaned and maintained her medical equipment, she reflected on the day's events. She had joined the Navy to help people, and, in a strange way, that's exactly what she had done. The enemy fighters she had engaged were trying to kill her teammates, and stopping them had undoubtedly saved American lives. But the complexity of the situation weighed heavily on her mind. She thought about the families of the men she had fought against, wondering if they had children or wives waiting for them to come home. War was never simple, and the moral complexities of combat were far more nuanced than anything she had considered during her medical training. Yet she also knew that given the same circumstances, she would make the same choice again. Commander Morrison found her in the medical bay later that evening, his arm in a sling but otherwise in good spirits. "How are you holding up, Doc?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her workstation. Sarah looked up from the equipment she was organizing, considering her response carefully. "I keep thinking about my medical school oath, sir. First, do no harm. Today I definitely caused harm, even if it was necessary." Morrison nodded, understanding the conflict she was experiencing. He had seen many good people struggle with the moral complexities of combat, and it was often the most ethical individuals who had the hardest time reconciling their actions. "Martinez, let me ask you something. How many lives do you think you saved today?" Morrison's question was direct but not confrontational. "My team consists of 8 operators. If those flankers had reached their position, they would have had clear shots at all of us. You didn't just save 1 life, you saved 8. Sarah considered his words, but the internal conflict remained. "I understand the tactical necessity, sir. I just never expected to be in this position. When I enlisted, I thought I'd be treating wounded soldiers, not engaging enemy combatants with sniper rifles." Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "Doc, war doesn't always give us the luxury of staying in our designated roles. Sometimes circumstances require us to step up and do things we never thought we'd have to do. The fact that you're struggling with this shows me that you're exactly the kind of person we want on our team." As they talked, other members of the SEAL team began filtering into the medical bay. Word had spread about Sarah's actions during the firefight, and they wanted to express their appreciation personally. Petty Officer Rodriguez was the first to speak up. "Doc, I don't know if anyone's told you this yet, but Johnson is going to make a full recovery because of the treatment you gave him under fire. And all of us are going home because you picked up that Barrett when it mattered most." The other team members nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see the genuine gratitude in their eyes. The conversation continued for another hour, with team members sharing their own stories of having to step outside their comfort zones during combat operations. Each man had faced moments where circumstances required them to do things they never expected to do, and they helped Sarah understand that adaptability was one of the most valuable traits a special operations team member could possess. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Sarah wrote in her journal about the day's events. She had always used writing as a way to process difficult experiences, and today had certainly qualified as one of the most challenging days of her life. As she wrote, she began to understand that her identity hadn't really changed, it had simply expanded. She was still the medic, still the person her team depended on for medical care. But now she was also someone who could be counted on when the tactical situation required skills beyond her primary specialty. The Barrett .50 caliber had been just a tool, and she had used it to protect her teammates just as effectively as she used her medical instruments to heal them. The next morning brought new challenges and new missions, but Sarah approached them with a different perspective. She continued to be the team's primary medical asset, but she also understood that in the fluid environment of special operations, everyone had to be prepared to contribute in whatever way the mission required. Commander Morrison's shoulder healed properly over the following weeks, but the events of that day had created a bond between him and his corpsman that went beyond the normal team relationships. He had seen Sarah Martinez transform from a hospital-trained medic into a complete special operations team member in the span of a single firefight, and he knew that kind of adaptability was rare. As their deployment continued, Sarah would face many more challenges and moral complexities. But the day she picked up Commander Morrison's Barrett .50 caliber rifle had marked a fundamental shift in how she understood her role and her capabilities. She was no longer just the medic, she was a fully integrated member of one of the most elite military units in the world, capable of contributing to the team's success in ways she had never imagined possible. 3 weeks after the Canyon firefight, Sarah Martinez found herself once again questioning the boundaries of her role as team medic. The intelligence briefing had been straightforward enough. A high-value target was believed to be meeting with Taliban commanders in a remote compound near the Pakistani border. The mission was supposed to be a quick in and out operation, with the SEAL team conducting a nighttime raid to capture or eliminate the target. But, as Sarah learned repeatedly during her deployment, military operations rarely went according to plan. What should have been a precision strike based on solid intelligence turned into a complex urban warfare scenario when the team discovered that the compound was much larger than satellite imagery had suggested, and the target had significantly more protection than anticipated. The team inserted via helicopter at 0200 hours, landing approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound to avoid detection by enemy sentries. Sarah carried her standard medical loadout along with additional trauma supplies, as intelligence suggested they might encounter wounded civilians who would need immediate medical attention. The approach march went smoothly, with the team reaching their overwatch position without incident. Commander Morrison, his shoulder fully healed from their previous engagement, positioned his operators around the compound's perimeter while Sarah established a casualty collection point in a small building that offered good cover and concealment. Through her night vision goggles, she could see the target building clearly, a 2-story structure made of mud brick and concrete, with several smaller outbuildings surrounding a central courtyard. The initial breach went perfectly. Morrison's team used explosive charges to simultaneously blow open 3 different entry points, creating maximum confusion among the defenders. Sarah monitored the radio traffic as the SEALs moved through the compound, systematically clearing rooms and securing potential threats. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan until the team reached the second floor of the main building. Contact. We've got multiple armed hostiles in the target room. The voice belonged to Petty Officer Thompson, one of Morrison's point men. Through her radio headset, Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire echoing through the compound. What had started as a precision raid was rapidly escalating into a sustained firefight. "Doc, we've got wounded coming your way," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Johnson took her round to the leg, and Williams has shrapnel wounds from a grenade. They're mobile but need immediate attention." Sarah was already prepping her medical supplies when she saw two figures approaching her position, supporting each other as they moved across the compound's courtyard. Johnson's wound was worse than Morrison had indicated over the radio. The bullet had struck his upper thigh, creating both an entry and exit wound that suggested it had tumbled after impact. Sarah immediately applied pressure while assessing for signs of femoral artery damage. Williams had multiple small puncture wounds across his back and arms from grenade fragments, but none appeared to be immediately life-threatening. "I can patch these guys up, but Johnson needs surgical attention within the next few hours," Sarah reported to Morrison. She was working by the light of a red-filtered headlamp, trying to stop Johnson's bleeding while keeping Williams conscious and stable. The sound of gunfire from the main building was intensifying, suggesting that the team was facing more resistance than anticipated. As Sarah worked on her wounded teammates, she began to hear a different type of weapons fire coming from the compound, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle firing from a distance. Someone was engaging Morrison's team with precise, aimed shots from an elevated position outside the immediate target area. The enemy had a sniper, and he was causing serious problems for the SEALs trapped inside the building. "All stations, this is Overwatch. We have a sniper in the hills approximately 800 meters northeast of the target building. He's got clear lines of sight on our primary and secondary exit routes." The voice belonged to Petty Officer Martinez, no relation to Sarah, who was serving as the team's designated marksman for this operation. "I can see his muzzle flashes, but I don't have a clear shot from my current position." Morrison's voice came over the radio, tense with frustration. "Overwatch, can you relocate for a better angle?" There was a pause, filled with the sound of gunfire, before Martinez responded. "Negative, Commander. If I move from this position, I'll lose Overwatch on the compound. The snipers got me pinned down pretty good anyway." Sarah finished treating Johnson's leg wound and moved on to Williams, removing small pieces of metal from his back while monitoring the radio traffic. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. Morrison's team was trapped inside a building with an unknown number of enemy fighters. They had a sniper preventing them from using their planned exit routes, and their Overwatch position was being suppressed by the same sniper. "Doc, how mobile are our wounded?" Morrison's question came at exactly the wrong time. Sarah looked at Johnson, who was pale but conscious, then at Williams, who was sitting up and trying to load a fresh magazine into his rifle despite his wounded arms. "Williams can fight if necessary, but Johnson needs to stay put. Moving him too much could restart the bleeding," Sarah responded. She was already calculating worst-case scenarios in her mind. If the team needed to make an emergency extraction, carrying Johnson would significantly slow their movement and make them vulnerable to the sniper. The radio crackled again with Morrison's voice. "All stations, be advised we have civilian casualties inside the building. Repeat, we have non-combatant casualties requiring immediate medical attention." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Civilian casualties complicated everything, especially when they needed medical care that only she was qualified to provide. "Commander, I'm going to need details on the civilian casualties," Sarah transmitted, already gathering additional medical supplies. Morrison's response was grim. "We've got at least 3 civilians, possibly more. Looks like they were caught in the crossfire when the shooting started. I need you to get up here, document." Sarah looked at her current patients, then at the building where Morrison's team was trapped. Johnson was stable for the moment, but moving him was risky. Williams could probably watch over Johnson, but he was wounded himself and wouldn't be much help if they came under attack. The sniper was still active, making any movement across the courtyard extremely dangerous. But there were wounded civilians who needed immediate medical attention, and Sarah was the only person in the immediate area with the training to help them. She made the difficult decision that would define the rest of the mission. "Williams, I need you to stay with Johnson. Keep pressure on that leg wound and call me immediately if anything changes." Williams nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What about the sniper, Doc? You can't make it across that courtyard with him up there." Sarah had been thinking about the same problem. The direct route to the main building would put her in the sniper's line of sight for at least 30 seconds, which was more than enough time for an experienced marksman to acquire and engage a target. She studied the compound layout through her night vision device, looking for alternative routes that would provide some concealment from the elevated sniper position. There was a narrow alley between two of the smaller buildings that might offer enough cover, but it would require her to approach the main building from an unexpected angle. "Overwatch, this is Document. I'm moving to treat civilian casualties in the main building. Can you provide suppressive fire on the sniper position when I give the word?" Martinez responded immediately. "Roger, Document. I can't guarantee hitting him, but I can make him keep his head down for a few seconds." Sarah gathered her medical supplies and prepared for the sprint across the compound. She had traded her standard M4 carbine for additional medical equipment, so she would be essentially defenseless during the movement. Everything would depend on timing and the covering fire from Martinez's position. "All stations, this is Document beginning movement to the main building in 30 seconds. Sarah took several deep breaths, visualizing the route she would take and preparing herself mentally for what she might find when she reached the civilian casualties. Military medicine was challenging enough when treating trained soldiers who understood the importance of following medical instructions. Treating terrified civilians in an active firefight would be something entirely different. "Doc, this is Overwatch. On my mark, I'll engage the sniper position. You'll have maybe 10 seconds of suppression before he can return effective fire." Sarah nodded to herself, even though Martinez couldn't see her. 10 seconds wasn't much time to cross an open courtyard, but it would have to be enough. "Mark!" Martinez's rifle began firing rapid, aimed shots at the distant sniper position while Sarah sprinted from her covered position toward the main building. She could hear bullets impacting the ground around her as the enemy sniper returned fire, but Martinez's suppression was working well enough to throw off his aim. Sarah reached the building's entrance and dove through the doorway just as a sniper round cracked past her head. Inside, she found chaos. The SEALs had cleared most of the building, but the process had resulted in significant destruction. Furniture was overturned, walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, and there were bloodstains on the floor that indicated both combatant and non-combatant casualties. Morrison met her at the entrance, his face grim behind his night vision goggles. "Doc, we've got 3 civilians down in the back room. 2 kids and an adult female. They were hiding when the shooting started, but they caught some ricochets and grenade fragments." He led her through the building toward the casualties, stepping over debris and avoiding areas where his team was still engaged with enemy fighters. The civilian casualties were worse than Morrison had indicated over the radio. The adult woman, probably in her 30s, had taken a rifle round to her abdomen and was unconscious with weak, rapid pulse. One of the children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, had severe lacerations on his arms and chest from grenade fragments. The second child, a girl perhaps 12 years old, was conscious but had obvious signs of internal injuries. Sarah immediately triaged the casualties, determining who needed the most immediate attention. The woman's abdominal wound was life-threatening and would require surgical intervention that Sarah couldn't provide in the field. The boy's lacerations were severe but manageable with proper trauma care. The girl's internal injuries were the most concerning because they were difficult to assess without proper diagnostic equipment. "Commander, I need an immediate medevac for these civilians," Sarah reported while beginning treatment on the boy's lacerations. "The woman needs surgical attention within the hour, and I'm concerned about internal bleeding in the girl." Morrison's response was frustrated. "Doc, we're still taking fire from multiple positions. The landing zone isn't secure, and that sniper is still active." Sarah worked quickly to stabilize her patients, using every technique she had learned during her medical training. She started 4 lines, administered pain medication, and applied pressure dressings to control bleeding. But even as she worked, she could hear the firefight continuing throughout the building. Morrison's team was still engaged with enemy fighters, and the tactical situation wasn't improving. All stations, this is Overwatch. The sniper just changed positions. He's moved to a location with better angles on the compound. I can see him setting up about 600 meters to the east. Martinez's report confirmed what Sarah already suspected: the enemy was adapting to their tactics and becoming more dangerous as the engagement continued. The boy she was treating had lost consciousness from blood loss, despite her efforts to control the bleeding from his wounds. The woman's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Sarah knew that without immediate surgical intervention, she wouldn't survive much longer. The girl was the most stable of the three, but Sarah suspected she had internal bleeding that would become critical within hours. Morrison appeared at her position, his rifle ready as he scanned for threats. "Doc, we need to start thinking about extraction. The quick reaction force is 30 minutes out, but we can't wait that long with the sniper controlling our movement routes." Sarah understood the implication. They would need to neutralize the sniper threat before they could safely evacuate both the team and the civilian casualties. "Commander, these civilians can't wait 30 minutes. The woman will be dead, and the boy isn't far behind." Sarah's voice was urgent but controlled. She had learned to communicate medical priorities clearly and concisely during high-stress situations. "We need to do something about that sniper now." Morrison was already thinking along the same lines. "Martinez has been trying to engage him, but the angle isn't right from his current position. We need someone to get to higher ground or find a flanking route." Sarah looked at the wounded civilians, then at Morrison. An idea was forming in her mind, but it was dangerous and would require her to once again step outside her role as team medic. "Sir, what if I could get to the roof of this building? I might be able to spot the sniper's position and provide targeting information to Martinez." Morrison considered the suggestion, weighing the tactical benefits against the risk to his corpsman. The building's flat roof would provide an excellent observation platform, but it would also expose Sarah to fire from the sniper she was trying to locate. "Martinez, that's too dangerous. You're needed here with the casualties." But even as Morrison spoke, Sarah was calculating the time factors involved. The woman had maybe 20 minutes before blood loss became irreversible. The boy wasn't much better off. Someone needed to deal with the sniper threat, and the team's designated marksman couldn't do it from his current position. "Commander, I'm not talking about engaging the sniper myself. I just need to spot his exact location so Martinez can make an effective shot." Sarah was already moving toward the stairs leading to the building's upper level. "The civilians are stable for the moment, but they won't stay that way much longer." Morrison reluctantly agreed to the plan, but with strict conditions. "You get up there, spot the sniper, and get back down immediately. No heroics, and if you take any fire at all, you abort and return to the casualties." Sarah nodded her understanding as she climbed the stairs to the building's second floor, then found a ladder leading to the roof access. The flat roof provided an excellent view of the surrounding terrain, but it also made Sarah visible to anyone watching the building. She used her night vision device to scan the hillside where Martinez had reported seeing the sniper's new position. At first, she saw nothing but rocks and sparse vegetation. Then, she noticed a slight movement near a cluster of boulders approximately 600 meters to the east. "Overwatch, this is document. I have eyes on possible sniper position, bearing 095 degrees from the main building. Range approximately 600 meters. He's positioned behind a large boulder formation, about halfway up the hillside." Sarah was using the spotting scope from her medical kit to get a better view of the target area. "Roger, document. I can see the area you're talking about, but I still don't have a clear shot from my position. The angle is wrong, and there's too much intervening terrain." Martinez's response confirmed what Sarah had suspected. The sniper had chosen his new position specifically because it was difficult to engage from the team's current locations. Sarah studied the terrain more carefully, looking for alternative firing positions that might work. The building she was on provided good elevation, but she would need a precision rifle to effectively engage a target at 600 meters. And there was only one person in the immediate area who had access to that kind of weapon. "Commander, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it," Sarah transmitted to Morrison. She had spotted a route that would allow Martinez to reach a better firing position, but it would require someone to provide overwatch while he moved. And the only person in a position to provide that overwatch was Sarah herself. Morrison's response was immediate and negative. "Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no. Get down from that roof and back to your patients." But Sarah had already seen how this scenario would play out. Without neutralizing the sniper threat, the team would be trapped in the compound until the quick reaction force arrived. By then, at least 2 of the civilian casualties would be dead, and the team would have spent hours in an increasingly dangerous tactical situation. "Sir, Martinez can reach a better firing position if someone provides overwatch while he moves. I'm the only one in position to do that right now." Sarah's voice was calm and professional, but Morrison could hear the determination behind her words. She had made a decision, and he knew from their previous experience that trying to change her mind would be difficult. The sound of gunfire from inside the building reminded everyone that the situation was far from resolved. Morrison's team was still engaged with enemy fighters, the sniper was preventing effective movement, and time was running out for the civilian casualties. Sometimes tactical situations required unconventional solutions, and Morrison was beginning to understand that Sarah Martinez might be exactly the kind of unconventional asset his team needed. "Doc, you're a medic, not a sniper. Even if you have the right weapon, engaging targets at 600 meters requires specialized training and experience." Morrison's objection was reasonable, but Sarah had been thinking about the same problem. She didn't need to be a sniper, she just needed to be accurate enough to force the enemy marksman to take cover while Martinez moved to a better position. "Commander, I'm not talking about making precision shots. I just need to put rounds close enough to his position to make him keep his head down. Give me something with decent range, and I can provide covering fire while Martinez relocates." Sarah's plan was simple but risky. Suppressive fire didn't require the same level of precision as sniper shots, but it did require someone willing to expose themselves to enemy fire. Morrison considered the tactical situation from every angle he could think of. His team was running out of options, and conventional tactics weren't working against an enemy who had clearly planned for this type of engagement. Sometimes success required taking calculated risks, and Sarah had already proven herself capable of rising to unexpected challenges. The decision, when it came, would change everything about how Morrison's team operated and how Sarah understood her own capabilities. But, in that moment, crouched on a rooftop in Afghanistan with wounded civilians dying below and enemy fighters closing in, conventional thinking wasn't going to save anyone. "Doc, there's a Barrett in the building's arms room. If you're serious about this, I'll have someone bring it to your position." Morrison's words carried the weight of command decision, but also the acknowledgement that desperate situations sometimes required desperate measures. Sarah felt the familiar mix of fear and determination that had become her constant companion during combat operations. Once again, circumstances were pushing her beyond the boundaries of her medical training and into territory she had never expected to explore. But she also knew that her teammates and innocent civilians were counting on her to adapt and overcome, just as she had done in the canyon 3 weeks earlier. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle that appeared on the rooftop minutes later was the same model she had used during her first firefight, but the circumstances were completely different. This time, she would be operating alone, without Commander Morrison's guidance, in a situation where precision and timing would determine whether people lived or died. As Sarah positioned the heavy rifle and began calculating range and wind factors, she reflected on how dramatically her role had evolved since arriving in Afghanistan. She was still the team's medic, still the person everyone depended on for medical care. But she was also becoming something else, a complete special operations team member capable of contributing to mission success in whatever way circumstances demanded. The Barrett .50 caliber felt heavier than Sarah remembered as she positioned it on the rooftop's concrete ledge. Below her, the wounded civilians were fighting for their lives while Morrison's team remained pinned down by enemy fighters throughout the compound. The sniper in the hills continued to control their movement, making evacuation impossible until someone neutralized the threat he represented. Sarah had approximately 15 minutes before the civilian casualties would reach a point where even immediate surgical intervention couldn't save them. The adult woman was showing signs of severe internal bleeding, and the young boy's pulse was becoming increasingly weak despite her treatment. Time was running out, and conventional tactics weren't working. Through the Barrett's powerful scope, Sarah could see Martinez moving from his original overwatch position toward a rocky outcropping that would give him a better angle on the enemy sniper. The movement would take him across approximately 200 meters of open ground, during which he would be completely exposed to enemy fire. Sarah's job was to keep the sniper's attention focused on her position instead of on Martinez's movement. Overwatch, this is document. I have you visual on your route to the alternate position. Beginning suppression in 30 seconds. Sarah's voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had studied the enemy sniper's position through her scope and identified several points where accurate fire might force him to take cover. The first shot from the Barrett announced Sarah's presence to every enemy fighter in the area. The massive rifle's report echoed through the valley like thunder, and the .50 caliber round struck a boulder just meters from where she had seen the sniper's muzzle flash. Through her scope, Sarah watched dust and rock fragments spray across the enemy position. The response was immediate. The enemy sniper shifted his attention from the main building to Sarah's position on the rooftop, and his return fire began impacting the concrete wall just below her position. But Sarah had achieved her primary objective. Martinez was now moving toward his new firing position without taking fire. Sarah worked the Barrett's bolt action and chambered another round, fighting against the massive recoil that threatened to throw off her aim. Her second shot struck even closer to the sniper's position, and she could see through her scope that the enemy marksman was being forced to take cover behind his boulder instead of maintaining observation on the compound below. Doc, this is Overwatch. I'm halfway to the new position. Keep that guy's head down for another 60 seconds. Martinez's transmission confirmed that the suppression was working, but Sarah knew that her exposed position on the rooftop was becoming increasingly dangerous as more enemy fighters became aware of her location. Automatic weapons fire from multiple positions began raking the building's rooftop as Taliban fighters throughout the area focused their attention on eliminating the new threat. Sarah had to keep low behind the concrete ledge, exposing herself only long enough to fire aimed shots at the sniper position before ducking back into cover. Her third shot with the Barrett struck the large boulder that provided the sniper's primary cover, and the massive .50 caliber round actually chipped off a significant piece of rock. Sarah could see through her scope that the enemy marksman was now completely suppressed, unable to maintain effective observation or fire while massive rifle rounds continued to impact around his position. Overwatch in position. I have a clear shot at the sniper location. Martinez had reached his alternate firing position and was setting up for what would hopefully be the decisive shot of the engagement. Sarah maintained her suppressive fire, keeping the enemy sniper pinned down while Martinez acquired his target through his own scope. The sound of Martinez's precision rifle was much quieter than the Barrett, but Sarah saw the impact through her scope. The enemy sniper's body went limp behind his boulder cover, and the return fire from his position immediately ceased. Martinez had made a clean kill shot at over 600 meters, eliminating the threat that had been controlling the compound's tactical situation. Target down. The sniper threat is neutralized. Martinez's confirmation allowed Sarah to finally take cover behind the rooftop's concrete wall. Her ears were ringing from the Barrett's massive reports, and her shoulder ached from absorbing the rifle's punishing recoil. But, more importantly, the team could now begin evacuation procedures for both the wounded SEALs and the civilian casualties. Sarah quickly broke down the Barrett and prepared to return to her medical responsibilities. The civilian casualties had been without direct medical attention for nearly 10 minutes, and she knew that every second counted in determining their survival chances. She climbed down from the rooftop and rushed back to the room where she had left her patients. The scene that greeted her was worse than she had expected. The adult woman was unconscious with extremely weak pulse, indicating that she was going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss. The young boy was barely responsive, and his breathing had become shallow and irregular. Only the 12-year-old girl remained conscious, but Sarah could see that she was becoming increasingly pale and weak.
Commander, I need that medevac helicopter now. These civilians won't survive much longer without surgical intervention.
Sarah was already working to restart 4 lines and administer emergency medications, but she knew that her field treatment capabilities were reaching their limits. The patients needed operating rooms and blood transfusions that only a hospital could provide. Morrison's voice came over the radio with welcome news.
Doc, the landing zone is now secure.
Quick Reaction Force reports they'll have a medevac bird on the ground in 8 minutes. The elimination of the sniper threat had finally allowed helicopter operations in the area, but 8 minutes might still be too long for some of the casualties. Sarah made the difficult decision to focus her limited resources on the patients with the best chances of survival. The adult woman's injuries were beyond her field treatment capabilities, but she might survive long enough to reach surgical care if Sarah could maintain her blood pressure. The boy's condition was critical but potentially manageable if she could control his bleeding and maintain his airway. Working with an efficiency born of extensive training and recent combat experience, Sarah managed to stabilize both patients enough for evacuation. She used every advanced trauma technique she had learned, pushing the boundaries of field medicine while fighting against time and limited resources. When the medevac helicopter finally landed in the compound's courtyard, she had done everything possible to keep her patients alive. The evacuation process was complicated by the need to transport both wounded SEALs and civilian casualties simultaneously. Sarah coordinated with the helicopter's flight medic to ensure that each patient received appropriate care during the flight to the forward surgical hospital. Johnson and Williams, the wounded SEALs, were stable and would make full recoveries. The civilian casualties were more problematic, but they were alive and had fighting chances. As the helicopter lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. In the span of less than 2 hours, she had treated multiple trauma patients under fire, climbed onto a rooftop in the middle of an active firefight, and used a .50 caliber sniper rifle to provide covering fire for her teammates' movement. The complexity and intensity of the engagement had pushed her far beyond anything she had experienced during training. Commander Morrison found her sitting on an overturned crate in the compound's courtyard, staring at the Barrett rifle she had used during the engagement. The massive weapon seemed almost surreal in the context of her medical training and background. 3 months ago, she had been treating patients in a sterile hospital environment. Now she was using precision rifles to save lives in ways that no medical textbook had ever described.
How are you holding up, Doc?
Morrison asked, settling down beside her on another piece of debris. His question carried genuine concern, and Sarah appreciated his understanding of the psychological complexity of combat operations. Each engagement seemed to push team members into new territory, requiring them to adapt and grow in ways they had never expected.
I keep thinking about those kids, sir. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old. No child should have to experience what happened in that building tonight.
Sarah's voice carried the weight of everything she had witnessed during the engagement. Combat medicine involved treating the victims of violence, and civilian casualties were always the most difficult cases to process emotionally.
Morrison nodded, understanding her struggle.
Martinez, you saved 3 lives tonight that would have been lost without your intervention.
The fact that you're bothered by the violence shows me that you're approaching this with the right mindset.
His words were meant to be supportive, but Sarah was still processing the moral complexities of her evolving role. Sir, I joined the Navy to heal people, but it seems like I'm spending more time behind rifles than medical equipment. I'm starting to wonder if I'm losing sight of why I became a medic in the first place. Sarah's internal conflict was evident in her voice, and Morrison recognized the importance of addressing her concerns directly. The commander considered his response carefully.
Doc, let me ask you something. How many lives have you saved since arriving in Afghanistan?
Sarah thought about the question, counting the wounded SEALs she had treated, the civilian casualties from tonight's mission, and the team members whose lives she had protected through her actions during previous engagements.
I don't know the exact number, sir.
Maybe 15 or 20 people who received direct medical treatment, plus, however, many were saved indirectly when I provided covering fire or eliminated threats. Sarah's answer revealed that she had been keeping mental track of her impact, even if she hadn't consciously calculated the total. Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "Martinez, you've saved more lives in 3 months than most medics save in entire careers. The difference is that you've learned to save lives in ways that go beyond traditional medical treatment. Sometimes the best way to heal people is to prevent them from being wounded in the first place." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Quick Reaction Force, which brought additional medical personnel and supplies to treat any remaining casualties. As Sarah worked with the other medics to establish a proper aid station, she reflected on Morrison's words. Her role had definitely evolved beyond traditional boundaries, but perhaps that evolution had made her more effective at fulfilling her primary mission of preserving life. Later that morning, as the team prepared to return to their forward operating base, Sarah received an update on the civilian casualties she had treated. The adult woman had survived surgery and was stable in the intensive care unit. The young boy had required multiple blood transfusions but was expected to make a full recovery. The 12-year-old girl had indeed suffered internal bleeding, but surgical intervention had been successful. The news that all 3 civilians would survive provided Sarah with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything she had experienced during her hospital work. These weren't routine medical cases, they were lives she had personally fought to save under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The combination of direct medical treatment and tactical actions had achieved results that neither approach could have accomplished alone. Over the following days, word of Sarah's actions during the compound raid spread throughout the special operations community. The story of a Navy corpsman who had treated casualties under fire, then climbed onto a rooftop to provide sniper suppression, captured the attention of senior commanders and fellow operators alike. But, more importantly, it solidified her position as a fully integrated member of Morrison's team. The psychological impact of repeatedly stepping outside her primary role was something Sarah continued to process during quieter moments. Each engagement had required her to make decisions and take actions that stretched the boundaries of her military occupational specialty. But she was also beginning to understand that the most effective special operations personnel were those who could adapt to whatever circumstances demanded. 3 weeks after the compound raid, Sarah found herself in yet another situation that would test her adaptability. Intelligence had identified a Taliban bomb-making facility in a remote mountain village, and Morrison's team was tasked with conducting a reconnaissance mission to gather evidence of the operation. What started as a surveillance mission would quickly evolve into something much more complex and dangerous. The village was located in a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountain slopes, making it an ideal location for concealed operations but a tactical nightmare for anyone attempting to approach undetected. The team would need to establish observation posts on the surrounding ridgelines, then coordinate their surveillance to document the bomb-making activities without alerting the enemy to their presence. Sarah's role in the mission was to provide medical support and serve as the team's primary radio operator, maintaining communications with the various observation posts scattered throughout the mountains. It seemed like a relatively straightforward assignment that would allow her to focus on her primary medical responsibilities while contributing to the team's intelligence-gathering efforts. But, as Sarah had learned repeatedly during her deployment, military operations had a tendency to become complicated in unexpected ways. The bomb-making facility turned out to be much larger and more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested, and the Taliban operatives running the facility were more numerous and better armed than anticipated. More significantly, the team's surveillance revealed that the facility was being used to manufacture improvised explosive devices specifically designed to target medical personnel and civilian ambulances. The bombs were being equipped with secondary charges that would detonate when medical personnel arrived to treat casualties from the initial explosion. It was a particularly insidious form of warfare that deliberately targeted the people trying to help wounded civilians. The discovery of anti-medical improvised explosive devices created a moral dilemma that went far beyond typical military decision-making. These weapons were specifically designed to kill medics, nurses, and civilian emergency responders who were trying to save lives. Allowing the facility to continue operating would result in the deaths of medical personnel throughout the region. Sarah found herself once again facing a situation where her medical oath conflicted with the tactical realities of combat operations. The bomb-making facility was producing weapons designed to kill people like her, medical personnel who had dedicated their lives to saving others. Stopping the facility's operations would protect countless medical workers, but it would require her to participate in offensive combat operations rather than her traditional role of treating casualties. Commander Morrison called for a team meeting to discuss their options. The original mission parameters called for surveillance and intelligence gathering only, but the discovery of anti-medical devices changed the tactical significance of the target. Morrison had the authority to modify the mission scope based on emerging intelligence, but he wanted input from his team before making such a significant decision. "The way I see it, we have two options," Morrison explained to his assembled team. "We can complete our surveillance mission as planned and pass this intelligence up the chain of command, or we can take action to neutralize this facility before it produces any more anti-medical devices." The team members listened carefully, understanding that their decision would have far-reaching implications.
Petty Officer Martinez, the team's designated marksman, spoke first. "Commander, those devices are specifically designed to kill medics and civilian emergency responders. Every day this facility operates, more medical personnel are going to die." His perspective reflected the feelings of most team members, who had developed strong protective feelings toward their corpsmen during their deployment. Sarah appreciated her teammates' concern for medical personnel, but she also understood the broader implications of modifying their mission scope. "Sir, if we take action against this facility, we'll be compromising our surveillance capabilities for future intelligence gathering. There might be other facilities we don't know about yet." Morrison nodded, acknowledging the validity of both perspectives. "Martinez, you're the one who would be most directly targeted by these devices. What's your recommendation?" The commander's question put Sarah in the position of having to choose between her traditional role as a passive medical observer and her evolving identity as an active team member. Sarah looked at her teammates, men who had repeatedly risked their lives to protect her during combat operations. She thought about the medical personnel throughout Afghanistan who were being targeted by the devices manufactured in the facility below. She considered her oath to preserve life and her responsibility to her team and the broader medical community. "Sir, I think we need to stop this facility from producing any more anti-medical devices," Sarah said finally. "But I want to do it in a way that maximizes our intelligence gathering while minimizing our tactical footprint." Her recommendation represented a middle ground that would allow the team to accomplish both objectives. Morrison smiled, recognizing the tactical sophistication that Sarah had developed during their deployment. "What did you have in mind, Doc?" The commander's question indicated that he was taking her tactical recommendations seriously, treating her as a full team member rather than just the unit medic. Sarah had been studying the facility's layout and operations schedule during their surveillance period. The facility appears to have a central workshop where they assemble the devices, plus several storage areas for components and finished products. "If we could plant charges in the storage areas while simultaneously gathering intelligence from the workshop, we could accomplish both missions." The plan that emerged from their discussion was complex and would require precise timing and coordination. Sarah would accompany a small team into the facility to photograph documents and equipment while other team members planted explosive charges in the storage areas. The operation would need to be completed before dawn to avoid detection by village sentries. As the team prepared for the mission, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her role had evolved since arriving in Afghanistan. She was no longer just the medic who treated wounded team members, she had become an integral part of the team's planning process and tactical decision-making. But, more importantly, she was learning to use her unique perspective as a medical professional to contribute to missions in ways that traditional military thinking might not have considered. The infiltration of the bomb-making facility would test every skill Sarah had developed during her deployment, both medical and tactical. But it would also represent the culmination of her transformation from a hospital-trained medic into a complete special operations team member capable of contributing to mission success in whatever way circumstances demanded. The infiltration of the bomb-making facility began at 0300 hours, during the darkest part of the night when village sentries would be least alert. Sarah moved with Morrison and two other team members through the narrow mountain paths that led to the facility, carrying specialized camera equipment along with her standard medical supplies. Her transformation from medic to full team member was complete, but
the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. The facility was larger than their surveillance had indicated, consisting of multiple interconnected buildings carved into the mountainside itself. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see sophisticated equipment that suggested this was a major production center, not just a small workshop. The Taliban had invested significant resources in creating a facility capable of manufacturing advanced improvised explosive devices on an industrial scale. Morrison hand-signaled the team to halt as they approached the facility's perimeter. Guards were posted at 2 obvious locations, but the SEALs' training and experience allowed them to identify additional sentries that a less experienced team might have missed. The security was more comprehensive than expected, indicating that the enemy understood the strategic importance of protecting this operation. "Doc, I need you to document everything you see in that main workshop," Morrison whispered as they prepared to breach the facility. "Focus on any medical equipment they might be using to test their anti-medical devices. We need to understand how sophisticated their targeting methods are becoming." Sarah nodded, understanding that her medical background would help her identify equipment and techniques that other team members might overlook. The initial breach went smoothly, with Morrison's team systematically neutralizing sentries and gaining access to the main facility without raising any alarms. Sarah followed the team through darkened corridors carved from solid rock, amazed at the engineering effort that had gone into creating such an elaborate underground complex. This wasn't a hastily constructed bomb factory, it was a permanent installation designed to operate for years. The main workshop contained equipment that made Sarah's blood run cold. Along with the expected bomb-making materials and explosive components, she found detailed anatomical charts showing optimal placement of secondary charges to maximize casualties among medical responders. The Taliban had studied emergency medical protocols and designed their devices specifically to exploit the predictable behaviors of medics and paramedics. More disturbing were the testing mannequins dressed in medical uniforms, positioned around mock casualty sites to simulate real emergency scenarios. The terrorists had actually rehearsed their attacks on medical personnel, refining their techniques to ensure maximum effectiveness when targeting doctors, nurses, and corpsmen like herself. The level of preparation was both impressive and deeply unsettling. Sarah photographed everything she could see, focusing particularly on documents that appeared to contain targeting instructions and tactical procedures. One manual was titled Targeting Medical Response Teams and contained detailed information about American and NATO medical protocols. Someone had done extensive research into how military medics operated in combat situations. As she worked, Sarah noticed something that made her realize the full scope of what they were facing. Mixed in with the targeting manuals were personnel files containing photographs and biographical information about specific medical personnel serving in Afghanistan. Her own photograph was among them, along with detailed information about her assignment to Morrison's SEAL team. The discovery that she was personally targeted by the bomb makers created a strange mix of fear and anger. These weren't random attacks on medical personnel, they were carefully planned operations designed to eliminate specific individuals who had been identified as high-value targets. Sarah had apparently attracted attention through her actions during previous missions, making her a priority target for Taliban operations. "Commander, you need to see this," Sarah whispered into her radio, photographing the personnel files while fighting to control her emotional response to seeing her own face among the targets. Morrison's voice came back immediately, recognizing the tension in her transmission. "What do you have, Doc?" Morrison was maintaining security at the facility's entrance while Sarah and the other team members gathered intelligence from the workshop. The tactical situation remained stable, but Sarah's discovery was about to complicate their mission significantly. "Sir, they have detailed files on American medical personnel, including targeting information and photographs. This isn't just about attacking random medics, they're hunting specific individuals." Sarah's report caused Morrison to reassess the strategic significance of their discovery. If the Taliban had developed systematic targeting capabilities against medical personnel, it represented a major escalation in their tactical sophistication. Sarah continued photographing documents while processing the implications of what she had found. The files contained information that could only have been gathered through extensive surveillance and intelligence collection. Someone with access to American personnel records had provided detailed information about medical staff throughout Afghanistan, including their assignments, capabilities, and operational patterns. The most disturbing document was a planning calendar showing scheduled attacks against medical facilities and personnel throughout the region. Sarah recognized several locations where American medical teams were currently operating, including field hospitals and forward aid stations that she had worked in during her deployment. The Taliban had developed a coordinated campaign designed to systematically eliminate medical capabilities throughout Afghanistan. Commander, this facility isn't just manufacturing devices, it's coordinating a strategic campaign against medical operations throughout the theater. They have targeting information for facilities across multiple provinces. Sarah's discovery elevated their mission from tactical intelligence gathering to strategic significance that would require immediate attention from senior commanders. Morrison made the decision to extend their time in the facility to gather as much intelligence as possible, despite the increased risk of detection.
Doc, I need you to photograph everything related to medical targeting.
This intelligence could save hundreds of lives if we can get it to the right people quickly enough. Sarah nodded, understanding the critical importance of documenting the enemy's anti-medical campaign. As she worked through the files, Sarah discovered something that explained how the Taliban had acquired such detailed information about American medical personnel. Several documents referenced a source identified only as the doctor, who appeared to be providing ongoing intelligence about medical operations and personnel. Someone with legitimate access to medical facilities was actively supporting Taliban targeting efforts. The possibility that an American medical professional might be providing intelligence to the enemy created a new level of urgency around their mission. Sarah photographed every document that mentioned the doctor, hoping that intelligence analysts would be able to identify the source and prevent further compromise of medical operations. Her documentation was interrupted by Morrison's voice over the radio.
All stations, we have movement outside the facility. Looks like a supply convoy arriving ahead of schedule. We need to finish up and prepare for extraction.
Sarah quickly completed her photography while other team members finished planting explosive charges throughout the facility's storage areas. The unexpected arrival of a Taliban supply convoy complicated their extraction significantly. Morrison's team would need to avoid contact while withdrawing from the facility, then wait for the convoy to depart before destroying the bomb-making operation. Any premature engagement would compromise the intelligence they had gathered and potentially allow some of the terrorists to escape with knowledge of American capabilities. Sarah followed Morrison's team through the facility's rear exit, carrying hard drives and documents they had collected along with her photographic intelligence. The information they had gathered represented the most significant intelligence breakthrough of their deployment, but they still needed to successfully extract from the area without being detected by the arriving convoy. The withdrawal through the mountain terrain tested every skill Sarah had developed during her deployment. Moving silently through rocky terrain while carrying sensitive intelligence required the kind of tactical proficiency that could only be developed through extensive combat experience. Her transformation from hospital medic to special operations team member was complete, and she moved with the same competence and confidence as her SEAL teammates. 3 hours after leaving the facility, Morrison's team reached their extraction point and called for helicopter pickup. As they waited for their ride home, Sarah reflected on everything she had learned during the mission. The Taliban's systematic targeting of medical personnel represented a fundamental change in how the enemy was conducting operations, and the intelligence they had gathered would require significant changes in how medical teams operated throughout Afghanistan. The helicopter ride back to their forward operating base gave Sarah time to process the emotional impact of discovering she was personally targeted by enemy operations. Being a combat medic had always involved risks, but knowing that specific terrorists had studied her background and planned attacks designed to kill her created a different kind of psychological pressure. Commander Morrison sat down beside her during the flight, recognizing that she was struggling with the personal implications of their discovery.
How are you handling this, Doc?
I know it's got to be difficult finding out you're specifically targeted. His concern reflected the bond that had developed between them during their deployment.
It's strange, sir.
I joined the Navy to help people, and now I find out that helping people has made me a target for assassination. Part of me wonders if I'm putting my teammates at risk just by being here." Sarah's voice carried the weight of everything she had experienced during their mission, and Morrison understood the complexity of her situation.
Morrison considered his response carefully. "Martinez, let me tell you something. The fact that the enemy is specifically targeting you tells me that you're having a significant impact on their operations. They wouldn't waste resources hunting someone who wasn't making a difference." His words were meant to be reassuring, but Sarah was still processing the implications of being personally hunted. The helicopter delivered them to their base as dawn was breaking over the Afghan mountains. Sarah's first priority was to deliver the intelligence they had gathered to the appropriate analysts, but she also needed to inform medical personnel throughout the theater about the targeting campaign they had discovered. The information could save lives if properly disseminated and acted upon. Over the following days, the intelligence Sarah had gathered led to significant changes in how medical operations were conducted throughout Afghanistan. Security procedures were enhanced, personnel rotation schedules were modified, and several planned attacks were prevented based on the targeting calendar she had photographed. The mission had achieved strategic significance that went far beyond their team's tactical objectives. But the personal impact on Sarah was more complex. Learning that she was specifically hunted by enemy forces created a psychological burden that was difficult to process. Every medical mission now carried the knowledge that terrorists had studied her background and developed plans specifically designed to kill her. It was a level of personal targeting that few military medical personnel ever experienced. The investigation into the doctor mentioned in the Taliban files eventually led to the arrest of a civilian contractor who had been providing medical support at various facilities throughout Afghanistan. The individual had been photographing personnel files and facility layouts, then passing the information to Taliban contacts in exchange for significant financial payments. Sarah's discovery of the targeting files had broken up a major intelligence operation that had been compromising medical security for months. 2 weeks after the bomb-making facility mission, Sarah received word that she was being recommended for the Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for valor. The recommendation cited her actions during multiple combat engagements, her intelligence gathering under fire, and her contributions to breaking up the anti-medical targeting campaign. It was an unprecedented honor for a Navy corpsman. But, more importantly, Sarah had found her place within the special operations community. She was no longer just the medic who treated wounded team members, she had become a complete special operations professional capable of contributing to missions in whatever way circumstances demanded. Her medical background provided unique perspectives that enhanced the team's capabilities, while her tactical skills allowed her to operate effectively in the most challenging combat environments. Commander Morrison called her to his office the day before their deployment was scheduled to end. "Martinez, I've been offered command of a new special operations team, and I want you to come with me. We'd be working directly for Joint Special Operations Command, handling the most sensitive missions in the theater." The offer represented the culmination of Sarah's transformation from hospital medic to elite special operator. Sarah considered the offer carefully, weighing her desire to continue serving with Morrison's team against her original goal of practicing medicine. Her deployment to Afghanistan had changed her in fundamental ways, giving her skills and experiences that would be impossible to replicate in a civilian hospital setting. But it had also shown her that her medical training could be applied in ways she had never imagined. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, and I'm honored that you think I'm qualified for that level of assignment. But I need some time to think about what I want to do with my career." Sarah's response reflected the complexity of her situation. She had proven herself capable of operating at the highest levels of special operations, but she also needed to determine whether that was the path she wanted to continue following. Morrison nodded, understanding her need for reflection. "Take all the time you need, document. But remember that you've developed capabilities that very few people possess. The combination of medical expertise and tactical proficiency makes you uniquely valuable for certain types of missions." His words acknowledged both her achievements and the difficult decision she faced. Over the following days, as Sarah prepared to return to the United States, she reflected on everything that had happened during her deployment. She had arrived in Afghanistan as a hospital-trained medic with limited combat experience.
She was returning as a decorated combat veteran who had participated in some of the most challenging special operations missions of the war. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle that had first introduced her to combat marksmanship sat in the team's arms room, waiting for the next deployment and the next person who might need to step outside their designated role to accomplish the mission. Sarah had learned that the most effective military professionals were those who could adapt to whatever circumstances demanded, regardless of their original training or expectations. Her medical training remained the foundation of her identity and capabilities, but her combat experience had shown her that healing people sometimes required unconventional methods. Sometimes the best way to save lives was to prevent people from being wounded in the first place. Sometimes protecting medical personnel required eliminating the threats that targeted them specifically. As Sarah packed her equipment for the journey home, she thought about the wounded soldiers she had treated, the civilian casualties she had saved, and the terrorist threats she had helped neutralize. Each action had contributed to preserving life and protecting innocent people, even when the methods went far beyond traditional medical practice. The question of whether to accept Morrison's offer to join his new special operations team remained unanswered, but Sarah had learned to be comfortable with uncertainty. Her deployment had taught her that the most important decisions often had to be made without complete information, under pressure, and with limited time for consideration. Whatever choice she made about her future, she would approach it with the confidence and adaptability she had developed during her time in Afghanistan. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez was treating patients in the emergency room of Walter Reed Medical Center when she received a call from Commander Morrison. His new team was preparing for a mission that would require someone with her unique combination of medical and tactical skills. After a brief conversation, Sarah submitted her request for reassignment to Joint Special Operations Command. She was no longer just the medic who had picked up a Barrett .50 caliber rifle during her first firefight. She had become something new, a complete special operations professional who understood that protecting life sometimes required taking it, and that the most effective healers were those who could prevent wounds from occurring in the first place. Her journey from hospital medic to elite special operator was complete, but her story was just beginning.